welcome to episode 7 of Talking Point. My name is Chelsea Sikora. I'm the creative director for the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce. And today's episode is coming to you from the Wind Technology Studio, and a thank you to our media sponsor, Royal Credit Union. Today's episode is about casting votes and building futures, understanding the impact of the upcoming elections. And who better to take us through the topic than Scott Rogers, who will be introducing our special guest today.
Well, we appreciate you joining us on Talking Point Podcast today, and everyone knows that there's an election coming up. In fact, you can't ignore it if you are getting any mail, if you are watching any television, if you are online and seeing ads, because we are hearing a lot. And we're really privileged to have with us John Frank today. You probably see John if you watch Channel 13. He's the analyst that they have on. John is a member of our Governmental Affairs Committee and our Good Government Council. And he has one of the deepest backgrounds in understanding politics in Wisconsin because he has been the chief of staff for a congressman for many years. He has taught government. He's an analyst, as we've heard, and he's been involved in politics as well. So I went on kind of long there, John. Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate it, Scott. Thanks for having me.
So for people that maybe haven't met you, tell us a little bit more about you and your background in politics and why we might be talking to you today.
Scott, I'm what's known as a political junkie. I've loved politics since I was a kid. I have been involved in it for more than 60 years. I was going door to door with literature when I was just in grade school. I was a poli-sci and econ major in college. By the time I got out of college, I had managed at least 4 or 5 different campaigns. And through my career, I've probably managed or consulted 30 or 40 campaigns. I was chief of staff for Congressman Steve Gunderson out in Washington, D.C., and also counsel for the House of Representatives Committee on Agriculture. Came back and taught at the technical college, law courses, political courses, economics courses for 27 years. And for the last 27 years, I've also been the political analyst over at WEAU Channel 13.
All right. Well, we're not quite as constrained in our time, so we can talk as long as we want. And I think people will be interested in what you have to say. So, the first thing to talk about is, why is Wisconsin so important this year in the election?
The interesting thing is there's kind of a symbiotic relationship between the presidential election and Wisconsin elections this year, because the results in the presidential election are going to be just as important to Wisconsin elections as the results from Wisconsin are going to be for the presidential elections. The interesting thing is because we have redistricted in the state of Wisconsin, there are going to be tens of thousands of voters who are going to go to the polls and not recognize names for their state representatives and their state senators because they are no longer in that district. And so what happens with the presidential election in the state of Wisconsin, who turns out, who wins, is probably going to have a lot to do with what happens with the state assembly and the state senate too, because when people go and they don't recognize names, they have a default. They have one of two defaults. Either they say, okay, I'm going to quit now, I'm just going to vote for what I know, or they're going to say, well, I voted for this person and this party for president, and now I'm going to take it down to the state assembly and the state senate too. So that's why the two are very important to one another, because without Wisconsin, it's going to be tough to win the presidential election.
So much more motivation to vote this year. And maybe let's step back to the presidential race then. So there are 50 states. So why is Wisconsin so important? We only have 8 electoral votes.
Wisconsin is important because it is one of 7 that are considered to be toss-up or battleground states. And it is important because if you take a look at the last 24 years, except for an election where the name Obama was on the ballot, Wisconsin elections in each of those other 4 presidential elections were decided by less than 1%. Between 5,000 and 20,000 votes. And so that's why Wisconsin is so important, because we are literally the purplest of the purple states. We are, both campaigns can look at it and say, hey, we've got a chance to win here. And so that's why we are so important. And those electoral votes are also important too, because if you go out and take a look at the projections, it's going to be a close race. It doesn't look like anybody's going to get more than 280, 290 electoral votes. And so when you're talking 8, 10, 12 electoral votes, that's very important.
So in most cases, you get all of the electoral votes from a state, and that's the case of Wisconsin.
Yes, 48 out of 50 states, you get all electoral votes. Nebraska and Maine do it by congressional district.
And you need 270. Is that the right number that you need?
Yes, you need 270 because 269 to 269 is a tie, and that could happen. There are mathematical ways that could happen.
All right, well, we'll cross that bridge if we come to it, but it's interesting. So that's not the only race that's statewide, though, that's important. So we also have a U.S. Senate race. What do we need to know about that?
Oh, U.S. Senate race is extremely important, too. And the reason for that is, the United States Senate is pretty much evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats, and the Democrats have 4 independents that caucus with them. And right now, there's just a 1-vote majority for the Democrats. And so it's a very important race because just a couple states will sway that to the other side, and the Republicans then take control of the United States Senate. There are 34 U.S. Senate seats open around the country. The Democrats have got the hardest time to keep their majority because 21 of the 34 are Democratic seats. And most of the competitive seats, except for the one in Florida, are all Democratic seats. And if you project out, there are a lot of people who think the Republicans are going to maintain the seats that they're defending, and they may pick up West Virginia and Montana, which would give them 51 seats in the Senate. Very important when it comes to Wisconsin, the race between Hovde and Baldwin, very important as well. At this point in time, it looks like Baldwin has a slight lead over the margin of error, but it could change.
All right. So, and what is your analysis of I guess you sort of said it. It looks like Baldwin has the upper hand this far out from the election, and people are going to be listening to this all the way up to the election, so we'll see what happens. But do you see that as a competitive race, and how do you handicap the Wisconsin Senate race this year?
The Wisconsin Senate race is going to be very competitive. Baldwin is the incumbent. She's been around Wisconsin politics either in the House or the Senate for 25 years, and as a result, she has name recognition. We always compare politics to football. It's all about field position and momentum. She has field position simply because her name's been on the ballot so many times. This is her 3rd time running for U.S. Senate, so she's been in 3 statewide races, so that obviously gives her an edge. The question is whether or not Hovde can do something that gives him the momentum to overcome that. And
we have that factor you talked about, is that people who come in to vote for president and they say, oh, there's these other races.
Yes, absolutely right. The Senate race, though, is probably one where people have a little more information simply because we have been besieged with commercials between the 2 campaigns.
There's another race that people in the 3rd district, you actually were chiefs of staff for a 3rd district congressman a few years ago. We have a 3rd district congressman now, Derek Van Orden, who was just elected 2 years ago, and Rebecca Cook is his Democratic opponent. Is this an important House race?
Oh, absolutely, because the House also is very, very narrowly divided right now. In between the House races, the House is 220 Republicans, 211 Democrats, and there are 4 open seats. And so you need 218 for a majority, so the Republicans only have 3 over the majority. And there are like 34 competitive seats there. And so this is a very important race. It's important for the state of Wisconsin, too, from the perspective it's truly the only purple district that's out there. Most of the rest of the districts are either clearly Republican or clearly Democrat. The 3rd Congressional District, as it has been for 40 years, is the purplest of the districts, House of Representatives.
So even though it's purple, Congressman Gunderson served several terms. Congressman Kine, centrist Democrat, served several terms. Now we have a 1-term Republican. Do we have people that stay in there for a long time, or how do you handicap this race?
You hit the key, Scott. That was very perceptive. Centrist, moderate. Because this is a purple district, there are a lot of people who are politically independent and ideologically moderate in the 3rd Congressional District. Just like the one across the river, the 1st Congressional District in Minnesota is exactly the same way. And you go down to Iowa along the Mississippi River, exactly the same thing too. And so yes, if you are a centrist, you have a tendency to keep in that district. And the interesting thing is Wisconsin. There's been some studies of the congressional representatives out in Washington, and how far to the blue side or how far to the red side they are. And the guy who's representing Wisconsin right now, based on his voting record, is rated the most purple of the 8 Congress people people in the state of Wisconsin. So this is going to be a tough race, though. I always tell people the toughest race that you ever have is the first time you run for re-election. It's not when you run the first time to be elected, because the first time you run after you've been elected, you've got a record, and you have to defend that record for the first time. And so this is going to be an extremely competitive race.
All right, so another one to watch and another reason to vote.
Absolutely right.
And if that weren't enough, tell us why things have changed so much in the legislature. So didn't we just have 2 new districts last time? Now we have new districts again. How did we get there?
Well, there are some people that filed court cases in the Wisconsin Supreme Court saying that because of the way that the districts were drafted, they were not necessarily fair. And they hung their hat on the fact that there were portions of districts that were not contiguous. They were kind of like islands sitting out there. Well, the reason that is because you try to keep municipalities together as much as possible, even though, sometimes municipalities are not contiguous. There's islands, for example, like the city of Eau Claire and the town of Washington. And so the Wisconsin Supreme Court basically overruled the districts and said, well, we want to set up a new map. People submitted maps, the ones that Governor Evers submitted. The Wisconsin State Legislature took a look at the ones that were submitted and said, other than ours, this is the one that hurts us the least. And as a result, this is the ones we're going to go with. And so that's how it happened. It basically was the Wisconsin Supreme Court pulling the plug on the existing districts and the Republicans accepting the governor's districts that he had submitted.
All right. So you said some people might be surprised when they go into the voting booth because the district that they're voting in might be different than the district they expected to in the past. Is that happening around the Eau Claire and Chippewa Valley area? It
is happening primarily around the Eau Claire, Chippewa Falls, Menominee area, more so than the, the outlying areas. You will find, we follow around here in west central Wisconsin 11 assembly districts. 3 are more urban because they involve Menominee, Chippewa Falls, and Eau Claire, and the other 8 are more rural, except for the one that's over in Hudson and New Richmond. The ones outside of the Chippewa Falls, Eau Claire, Menominee area, while they have been reconfigured, most of the people who are running for re-election there have a majority of the old district in there. And so those are the ones that are not really that different. The ones that are different are what we would call the old 31st Senate District, and the old 23rd Senate District in the Eau Claire, Chippewa Falls, and Menominee area.
So are there any particular assembly races? Well, let's talk about what's going to be on the ballot. So every assembly seat is up every election.
Yes.
But not every Senate seat is up.
That's correct. There are 99 assembly seats and 16 Senate seats that are up. In the Eau Claire area, in the Chippewa Valley, there are no Senate seats up this time. Those are all odd-numbered seats. They'll be up in 2 years. The only one in our area is over in the Hudson River Falls, New Richmond area, and that's Senate District number 10.
All right. Well, let's touch on the assembly districts, and let's come back to the Senate a little bit. Although for people that haven't looked that closely at it, one of the things we do have is that each Senate district has 3 assembly districts within it, and so that becomes relevant later. But we have every assembly district up, and you said there have been some changes locally. So what are some of the key ones?
Well, the key ones are that some people have. It's as one who has over 40 years participated and helped people with the drawing of lines and districts and so on. They're kind of head scratchers as to why you would do it this way, other than it tends to benefit one party more so than another. Let's take the Eau Claire area first. We historically have had 2 districts. One is the city of Eau Claire itself, and then part of the city, just a little bit mixed in with Eau Claire and a few other rural areas in the area. What has happened now is that they have divided the city of Eau Claire almost in half. The eastern and northern parts of Eau Claire, along with Altoona, Fall Creek, Augusta, and the rest of the eastern part of Eau Claire County, and just a little bit, of Chippewa County, are now in what they call the 91st Assembly District, versus represented by the current representative Emerson, Jody Emerson. The south and west portions of the city of Eau Claire, along with the southwestern part of Eau Claire County, a little bit of Dunn, and a little bit of northern Trempealeau County, Osseo, Oliva, and Strum are now the 93rd district, and that's going to be an open seat because the current state representative, Warren Petrick, has retired. The most interesting one is the 92nd district, which is just above the city of Eau Claire. What they've done is they've taken the cities and villages of Cadott, Chippewa Falls, Elk Mound, and Menominee and put them in one district, and then taken the rest of Chippewa County and pushed it north, and the rest of Dunn County and pushed that west. And so you have a situation where you've got the county seats and the major population centers divorced from the rest of the counties, despite the fact that if you took the counties by themselves, they would be almost assembly districts unto themselves. And so there's only one reason that you would do something like that, and that's because you think you're going to be able to get somebody from a particular political party elected.
Right, so quite a change there, and even the 92nd has a few precincts of the city of Eau Claire that are in Chippewa County are in the 92nd.
Yes, and the town of Halley, yes, and yeah.
So those are probably the more theoretically competitive districts because
Yes.
all three of them, at least if you look at things like votes for U.S. Senate and governor, they come out in the 50s for one of the parties as opposed to a higher number. Mm-hmm. So do you see those three as being competitive in this race?
Yes. The interesting thing is people, in particular, and the Marquette people too, say, well, they analyze the Assembly and Senate districts based upon the vote for president and governor. But what they seem to forget is that this is a purple area, full of independents, full of ideological moderates that tend to split their ballots. And so that's not always a good reading. But the reason those three are going to be competitive and the other 8 are probably not going to be competitive, they're basically going, and one of them is open, but basically I think right now it's 10 Republicans, 1 Democrat in those 11 districts, and those 8 are represented by Republicans. They probably will stay that way. But the reason that the 91st, 93rd, and 92nd are going to be competitive is because in order to split the city, they had to take in some areas and add it to Democratic areas in the city of Eau Claire and make it, a little bit, more even. And the reason the 93rd, south and west of the city of Eau Claire, is going to be competitive because it's an open seat. And the reason the 92nd is going to be, and that would be Menominee, Chippewa Falls, town of Halley, is going to be competitive is because you've got the sitting representative from Menominee there, but you also have a former representative in Joe Pluff who's going to run against Moses. And so you've got 2 people that do have name recognition, although one of the name recognitions is a bit dated. But those 3 are going to be the 3 that we're going to watch. North and East Eau Claire, South and West Eau Claire, and Menominee, Chippewa Falls, Elk Mound, and the town of Halley.
All right, so I'm holding a map up to the microphone so people can see what we're talking about, right? I'm just kidding. But we'll come back to that and talk about how to find your district, that sort of thing. But let's maybe quickly go through those 3 races then. So,
okay.
And make sure people understand who the candidates are. So you did mention that Jody Emerson is a current member of the Assembly. She actually is still in the 91st, but the district's changed quite a bit. And Michelle Skinner is the Republican candidate currently on the county board. So what do you know about that race?
Well, Jody Emerson has represented the area that particular. The interesting thing is the 91st and 93rd are about the only ones that kept their same numbers. And the rest of the numbers, that's why I tell people, don't pay any attention to the numbers. Yeah. Look at the areas, because the 91st and 93rd are the only ones whose numbers basically stayed the same. Jody Emerson has represented that area for 6 years. The interesting point is that the person running against her, if you use the full name, I think that she's got on the ballot, is Michelle Megadance Skinner. And she's a former anchor from the 1980s, one of the TV stations in Eau Claire. So she's got name recognition. I believe she's also on the county board. And so this is probably a much more competitive race than what Jody Emerson has faced in the last 4 years.
And the 92nd, that's the district you mentioned, is Menominee and the city of Chippewa Falls. And that's we have an incumbent there from Menominee. The district number changed, so we're not going to try to get there. Who are the two candidates there?
Clint Moses is the current Republican representative, and Joe Pluff is the former Democratic representative. I believe he finished his service there. I think he was there from 2005 through 2014, if my memory serves me correctly. So it's been about 10 years, but they both have name recognition.
All right. And then the open district is that one you talked about. It's the west side of Eau Claire, south side of Eau Claire, west and south district. That's the 93rd. That one's completely open. So what do you make? Who are the two candidates there, and what do you make of that one?
James Robiecki is the Republican candidate. He's on the Town of Washington board. He's relatively new to the Town of Washington board. And the other one is Christian Phelps, who has experience in politics, but not elected experience in politics. So this is going to be wide open. And this is another one where the presidential election is probably going to have a big impact, because in creating these districts the way they did and drawing the line in Eau Claire, they have put the university and the college wards, the old wards 3, 5, and 6, which means something to people who've been around forever and ever, but it's the ones surrounding the college. They put that in the 93rd. It hadn't been there before. And so if you have, and this election is going to be all about turnout. And so if you can get people who are enthusiastic and they can get the college campuses and the students to vote, that could have an impact on this election.
All right. Well, it's really going to be interesting, and they're also both very young candidates, so it'd be interesting to see how that comes out.
Yeah, well, they're very young candidates, but as a guy who worked for a congressman who was elected to the United States Congress in 28, anything is possible.
Yes. Maybe touch very briefly on the other three. This 67, 68, 69th. We're not trying to use numbers a lot, but those are the other three that come in, pick up a bunch of some of Dunn County, Chippewa County, to east of us. They each have Republican incumbents running in them, whose numbers changed, although their districts didn't change a lot. But one of them actually moved. So let's touch on those three districts.
Yeah, 67th is up in Barron County. It's Barron County, Northern Dunn, and Rice Lake. That's David Armstrong. He's the economic development specialist for Barron County, and he's being opposed by a Democrat, Jeff Foster. And that is a race. All three of these races that we're going to talk about now, the Republican has won by 20 plus points in the last two elections, and so they're not the most competitive, but in this election, anything can happen when you've got both redistricting as well as you got a presidential election on top. The 68th is represented by Rob Sommerfeld. He's been in there since 2016. He's from Bloomer. He's being opposed by Richard Pulcher. That's Northern Chippewa County, Russ, Price, and Taylor counties. He's inheriting a portion of a district that the other representative is retiring. Very Republican area. Taylor County, very Republican area. So that's probably a safe Republican district. The 69th is going to be the interesting one of those three. You have Karen Hurd. Once again, first time she's facing re-election. As I said before, first time re-elect is the most difficult election you're going to have. She's got even though she's represented a lot of the territory that's over in Clark County there, because that's Clark County, Medford, and Abbotsford. She's being opposed by Roger House, who's a Democrat. She's had to move in order to represent that district. And so that she doesn't have all the name recognition that you would expect an incumbent to have. But again, Clark County, very Republican area.
All right, so you and I are both junkies a little bit, so I'm going to bring up one other thing. And all three of them had primary opponents.
They did. And the reason they did that is because there's a kind of a text going on here in Wisconsin politics. There's kind of a feud going on between the Trumpites and the Speaker of the Assembly, Voss, and what they tried to do is recruit a number of people to run against Republican incumbents with the idea of getting a number of people who are more favorable to President Trump in the Assembly, so that when the time came to elect a new Speaker, Robin Voss wouldn't have the votes. And so all three of those were defeated fairly significantly.
So speaking of former TV anchors who serve in the legislature, and throw one other little thing in there, because I'm sure we have people in Dunn County listening to us. So Western Dunn County is now in the 28th. That turned out to be an open seat. And who is the Republican candidate there?
Rob Krybeck. Yes, Rob Krybick, former representative from the city of Eau Claire for 14 years. And here's where I got to do the full disclosure. I was his campaign manager the first time he ran in 1992, so I have to do that full disclosure.
Yes, and so Rob served a number of years. He moved on to a couple other positions, was recently serving as, actually for a number of years as the director of the New Richmond Chamber, and he's getting back into politics and will probably be elected given the makeup of that county.
Yeah, I know Rob very well, and he loves politics. He loves helping people. This is what he loves doing.
So in a minute, we want to talk about how you as a listener can sort of weigh who you want to vote for, especially if you're in one of the competitive races or you just want to see what some of these candidates stand for. But maybe we should just touch real quickly, looking ahead a couple years into the Senate, because these shifts in districts have created some interesting things. So Jesse James currently serves as the senator for the 23rd district, which currently, or up till now, had included Altoona. Mm-hmm. And Jeff Smith, the Democrat from Eau Claire, is in the 31st district. Neither of them are up for re-election this year, so they will continue to serve 2 more years. And then to the north of us, the 25th district, Romaine Quinn from Barron County also is not up for re-election. But because of some of these district shifts, it might get interesting in 2 years. What do you see happening?
Well, it might get interesting from the perspective that people are either going to have to move or they're going to face each other. Okay, because right now the currently configured district, which is now still the 31st Senate district, both Jesse James and Jeff Smith live in, and so they theoretically could face off against each other in an election in 2 years. Again, going back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, the fact is that in creating this new 31st Senate district, what they did is they lopped off the more Republican areas of Trempealeau, Pepin, Buffalo counties and put them in the 10th Senate district and put in, an area that's probably a little bit more favorable to Democrat candidates up from going from Menominee through Chippewa Falls up to Cadott. And so people are going to have to assess whether they think they can win in that district. If not, they can move to a different district, or at least one of those candidates is getting up in years because he's about my age and he may just decide he's going to retire.
Yeah, so the 10th district to the south and west of us, that's Rob Staffsholt. He is up this year, but is probably not in a competitive race.
It's not. Again, they took away portions of Polk and Burnett County from him and gave him portions of Buffalo, Pepin, and Trempealeau counties. But it's like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It kind of balances out. It all depends on the urban areas there in New Richmond and Hudson and River Falls as to exactly what'll happen there.
All right. So it'll be interesting in 2 years, and that little portion there was more for the political junkies. So hopefully you stuck with us. But we do want to talk about, if you're thinking about, we know candidates are important. John, you talked about the fact that the top of the ticket's going to affect some of these races. But what's your perspective on the specific, not asking you about these specific candidates, but how do specific candidates and what they do and what they talk about affect how some of these rates come out?
The important thing that candidates do is to address things with specificity. That's one of the things that have been missing in some of the debates that we've been listening to lately. They've been very general. In fact, in listening to a recent debate, one of the criticisms were, well, gee, all you ever have is 2 or 3 sentences on your web page as to your specifics. Well, I pretty much tell you, go to any campaign website, and that's all you're ever going to find. It's going to be very general, because oftentimes the more specific you get, the more things you open up to challenging. And so the candidates being specific is going to have an impact, particularly among people who are single issue voters. There are people who are out there that don't really call themselves conservatives or liberals or moderates. They simply care about a single issue. And that's why, what a particular person at the top of the ticket takes a position on that issue, sometimes it gets translated to people further down the line. And so that can have an impact on the race.
All right. So I mentioned at the introduction that John is a member of the Good Government Council, which is a subcommittee of our Government Affairs Committee at the Chamber. And if I haven't already mentioned it, the Chamber does not endorse candidates. What we try to do is present information for voters like we have today. And we do a good government council questionnaire where we ask them specific questions of candidates as to where they stand on issues of importance to the economy, why they're running, here in their own words, what are their top priorities. And then we also have produced 5-minute video sit-downs with all 12 candidates in the 6 districts we talked about. And those are available to you on the Chamber website. So we'd encourage you to go there, take a look at that, go to the election page on the website. We have links to those things. And we also put in links to their Facebook pages and their websites and whatever information you're going to find there. So encourage you to make sure that you study up and make an informed decision. John, any last words that people should hear about this election?
No, other than I would like to second what you just said too, and that is I don't endorse candidates. I have not worked for any particular candidate in all the time I've been doing the work as a political analyst after I came back from Washington, D.C. And in fact, one of my favorite stories is one night when I was doing the analysis, the anchor informed me that he was going to have to say something at the beginning of my analysis because they had a couple phone calls. And so we go on live on air, and he says, John, before we go, I got to say that we had a couple phone calls last week. 5 minutes after we got off the air, somebody called and said, I don't know why you let that John Frank do, the political analysis. He's the worst liberal I've ever heard. And he said, and 5 minutes later, we had another call that came in. And he said, I don't know why you let John Frank do that political analysis. He's the worst conservative I've ever heard. And the other anchor turns and says, that tells us exactly where we need you to be.
Well, we do want people to be informed. The reason we have an advocacy initiative at the Chamber is because what happens in government affects business. And so we strongly encourage you to study up on the issues, make sure you know what districts you live in, and think about your vote, and be sure to take advantage of we would say responsibility, but the right that you have to vote on November 5th. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, John.
You bet. Thank you.
All right. Well, that wraps up this episode of Talking Point. Thank you to our media sponsor, Royal Credit Union. We'll catch you in the next one.